Fantastic. So I just want to welcome all the panelists and also our participants to our we call it roundtable discussions on the future digital ophthalmology and eye care section. So this is going to be a 1 hour section. I probably are going to show my PPT, and then we allow people to briefly introduce yourself first. And okay, 1 second. So can everybody see the slide? Yeah. Yes, good. So this is actually, it's going to be a 1 hour, 15 minutes, hopefully 1 hour sections. So we have about 1 hour time, and then to discuss about a little bit about what is the future of the digital ophthalmology or digital health in the context of ophthalmology and eye care. And then we'll have 3 major sections. One is what is the most important breakthrough and hurdles. So we're not talking about in 100 years time. We're talking about in 2022 or the very near future. What is the breakthrough and what is the hurdle? And then secondly, we would like to talk about we'd like to talk about what's the future role of digital ophthalmology and eye care. What we mean digital ophthalmology, I'll explain a little bit. And then we'll also discuss what should we adjust in the future. So I think let me just stop sharing and then allow our panelists to introduce yourself. And probably just a little bit housekeeping item first. We consider this is as a forum or as a way to communicate between our panelists and also with the participant as well. So I would just remind our participant, please just use the Q&A to ask any question you would like or any whatever challenge question. We'll choose the questions and ask the panelists. And secondly, of our panelists, if you wanted to speak, and then please just raise your hand, but then remember lower your hand after you ask the question. So let me just introduce our moderator, co-moderator. First, Robert. So Rob, can you just introduce yourself very briefly?
Sure. Thanks, Ming. My name is Robert Chang. I am a glaucoma specialist. I work at Stanford University. I've been there 13 years, and I mostly practice cataract and glaucoma and do some work in big data, AI, computer vision.
And Robert is also a former vice president of APTOS. Yeah, he's a big fan of digital technology or any innovation. And then let me have a Xingru. Xingru, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Xingru, and I am currently working at He Eye Specialist Hospital as the assistant to the president here. I'm also the dean of the School of Public Health at He University. And I have a similar training background with Professor Mingguang He. I graduated from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and obtained a Doctor of Public Health degree there. And my research focus is on how to deploy innovative technologies and make it sustainable in scale. So I'm very delighted to be here.
Fantastic. So Xingru representing Her Eye Specialized Hospital. So this is the host of the APTOS annual meeting. So good. So I just let me just pass around. So Judy, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, my pleasure. Hello, everyone. My name is Judy Kim. I'm a professor of ophthalmology and visual sciences and professor of Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences at the Medical College of Wisconsin in the United States. I also direct Tele-Ophthalmology and research at our university as well. And I will be the incoming president of American Society of Retina Specialists. So I look forward to working with all my friends and colleagues around the world.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. And then Martin.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Morton. I'm an associate professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I'm a retina specialist. I have a background of research in biomedical engineering. So my research interests are predominantly in the field of medical instrumentation.
And Eric.
Good evening. Good morning, everybody. I'm Eric Rosenberg. I'm, I guess, co-founder of the Digital Ophthalmic Society, a new up-and-coming society dedicated towards kind of this subject matter and trying to bring all all the ships together and rise in the tide. I am a complex anterior segment surgeon out of New York. I'm a director of the clinical technology of our large private equity group, Site MD, spanning about 4 US states, about 100 offices, and a little over 100 ophthalmologists. I'm also associate professor of ophthalmology at New York Medical College. And my background is also a graduate and undergraduate degrees in biomedical engineering and mechanical engineering as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Richa?
Hello, everyone. My name is Richa Tiwari, and I'm based in Singapore. I work at Google, specifically Google Health. My background is in, I'm a clinical research and scientist by background, but having worked in pharma for over 10 years, and in the last 5 years, I've been working at Google. I became interested in seeing how we could use AI technology in making progress in healthcare. So currently, I lead our AI research and deployments in the APAC region, and specifically with a focus on our AI screening tool for diabetic retinopathy. Nice to be here.
Fantastic. Stephen?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Stephen Odaibo. I'm a retina specialist. Also a computer scientist. My background is in mathematics, undergrad degree in computer science. I'm CEO of Retina AI, and we're a startup based in Houston, Texas. And we're building products that use the retina scans to diagnose disease, both ophthalmic disease as well as systemic disease. So I wear many hats, at the organization. I do continue to see patients and have one foot in the clinical world and another foot in the AI world as a full stack AI engineer and interim CTO.
Fantastic. Daniela?
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniela Ferrara. I'm a retinal specialist, and I have a PhD in retinal imaging. I'm assistant professor of ophthalmology at Tufts University in Boston, and I'm principal medical director for Genentech Roche. At Genentech, I lead the recently formed program, the so-called personalized healthcare program, and we've been leading a large line of research to implement AI-based tools in clinical trials and eventually make those tools available also for patient care.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Daniela. So actually, now we have over maybe getting very close to 300 participants. So it turned out to be the hottest sections in the meeting, in the APTOS meeting. So in the interest of our audience or participant, I just copy paste very brief instructions for you and the title. If we make any mistake, it's my mistake. So good. So let us just go ahead with the slide, and then we just before we get into the discussion, let me just briefly summarize what we talk about when we when we discuss digital ophthalmology and eye care. So then just going back to 2019, before the COVID pandemic, actually WHO said they set up a new department called digital health, and then they tried to set up also a global strategy on digital health 2020 to 2025, and then COVID come. And then this is a slide I copy paste from Dr. Gavin Tan's presentation. So in Singapore, they're running a reading center-based DR screening program. So this is actually one of the core components of digital health in the WHO concept. They call it e-health, electronic health. They're talking about telemedicine and how to, and also integrated electronic medical record or information system, and to create a new care, new type of care. And then this is also a copy paste from Dr. Gavin Tan's talk. And then he talk about specifically in the telemedicine in the context of ophthalmology or eye care, from symptoms and how to examine them. And also it can be and then how to interpret the result with either AI or non-physician grade, very, I mean, all these in this flow, patient management flow, and then also the how to manage them. So I'm not going to go to the detail. I'll let the panelists discuss in the future. Very soon. So then this is how we understand this in the context of Australia. Because in Australia, the human or professional very expensive. We're talking about over 100,000 or 200,000 costs. So we actually put everything automatic. We minimize the dependency on people or even technicians and non-professionals. So this is a way how to run a fully automatic screening for eye diseases, including DR. And then this is like a kiosk system, quite big, and then we also make it very, very small, like this size. And then so also very low cost, like from the camera cost now. As you know, all the camera are getting inflated price now. We talk about 40,000 Aussie dollar for desktop fundus camera, but this type of camera is very cheap, like 300 or 3,000 or 4,000. So then the image quality is reasonably good, and then we are running these AI things, and then also in the concept of WHO e-health on this. In parallel to e-health, they also the second components of digital health, they call it m-health, mobile health. So they're talking about mobile apps and wearable device or sensor. And this is the very commonly used COVID safe app proposed or run by Australia federal government. But then I just read the newspaper, they reckon this is the greatest value of the government. They spend $10 million, government spent 10 million Aussie dollar to develop the app, and then another $7 million to advertise it. But eventually they just find the original idea is to chase the close contact, identify the close contact, but eventually they just identify 2 additional cases on the top of manual reporting system. So it really is a big value. But then there's another successful example is run by Centre of Eye Research Australia. So this is a very easy way to measure visual acuity using the face recognition technology to calibrate the testing distance. So it can achieve use the front camera to and face recognition and then to calibrate the testing distance. And then this software, this app, mobile app is going to be adopted by WHO as a global recommended home use visual acuity testing. Very soon they will announce it this year. So then the third components of digital health proposed in the WHO concept is they call it integrated networks. So for example, the e-prescribing is getting very popular in Australia. So they are not using an app. They actually is a very simple short message system, SMS, sending a short SMS with the link. So you just, when you go to the pharmacy, you just show the link and then click on the link, and then in the system, the pharmacy, they already have your information and so on. And this is another very quite successful example showing what is a referral network. So this is a web-based system. They call it Oculo. Now the Oculo has just recently been acquired by Eye Care. So then Oculo is a very simple way to connect optometrists and ophthalmologists for referral. So that is all I want to say. And WHO concept, 3 things: e-health, m-health, and integrated network. So let's just move on to the first topic. So any questions so far from our panelists? Any disagreement? No, good. Yeah, then so going back to the first discussion, breakthrough and hurdles. I will actually pass this moderator role to Robert first. So Rob, can you organize our discussions on what's the opportunity and hurdles in 2022 and the near future? We're not talking about 100 years. 100, we'll talk about like digital or robotic surgery and so on. But no, now we've got to be a bit realistic. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, I think maybe the best way to start the discussion would be to kind of narrow it down and focus a little bit, because we all come from different practice settings and situations, like industry versus clinical care versus like screening preventative health scenarios. I think applying digital technology and computer imaging algorithms can be seen very differently in different settings. So maybe we start with Daniela, who has experience both in clinical trial, clinical practice and industry, and kind of give us the perspective of how do we deploy something cost effective in a specific scenario to eventually think about the generalization of it to all patients later.
Thank you, Robert. I want to share 2 very different experiences from our group. I love your comment that it's good to put the discussion into context. Our group has two main lines of research, if you will, when we have a subgroup that develops patient-facing apps, and mostly to measure visual acuity, and they are delivered to smartphones. And then we have another group that's the main focus of my research on AI-based algorithms, first for clinical trials and then for patient care. And those are really two worlds. We've been learning by doing and by collaborating with regulators that the hurdles and the challenges to bring those products to market are very different. So focusing first on the patient-facing apps, you know, COVID accelerated so much, and we had a prototype, and we were really unsure how patients would incorporate that in their routines, how patients would feel using, and COVID came, and we just released the app. And our academic collaborators working closely with Roche, they really asked, it was like, you know, my patients can't come here. How can we help them? And we were gratefully surprised to see the adoption in elderly populations with neovascular AMD that couldn't go to the office. They felt so reassured, and they figure out how to use it. And it was very easily incorporated in their routine. That's not to minimize the challenges behind producing and validating and developing such an app. But if we shift gears now to the AI-based tools, it's a completely different world. And what we learn again by doing is there is a massive gap between a very promising proof of concept algorithm that we can see interesting signals and we get nice publications and we can engage with the retina community, between that and having again a ready to be deployed product. It's again a massive gap. And as we all know, IDXDR and then iNuc were able to cross the line. But when we see their use cases and how they are helping patients at this point, in comparison to the potential, it's again a massive gap. So all of our groups have AI-based algorithms that can classify the RSS scale and can give us very sophisticated readouts of the fundus. However, what's approved, at least from the FDA, is a DR yes or no. So again, I would cite that as another hurdle, how to make proof of concepts truly available to improve patient care and then clinical trials. I'll finalize saying I feel my group is very fortunate with the ability to test those AI-based tools in the clinical research environment first, because then we can assure patient safety. And by deploying clinical trials, of course, there are other risks by deploying an experimental tool side by side with an experimental molecule, but it's a controlled environment that we feel very confident that the AI-based tools not going to bring any safety concerns to patients.
Thank you so much for dividing those two areas, sort of the low-hanging fruit of testing vision apps where you can deploy it right away, digital ophthalmology style where the risk is very low, versus, you know, the regulated environment of diagnosing conditions and making a mistake could, you know, have a real impact at a large scale. So I want to turn it over to Stephen now, because, you know, he's leading a company that is, you know, Retina AI, looking for either diagnosing or screening, referring, whatever FDA level of regulatory hurdle. Where do you see this going in the next year? Do you think more people will be doing community screening, you know, screening at optometry primary care level? Or do you think it's still a tool that ophthalmologists will be using, you know, because there's not enough of them and the access to care is very difficult? Which kind of markets do you think digital ophthalmology will become more prevalent first?
Yeah, thanks so much. Phenomenal question, Robert. And I'm piggybacking off of Daniela's comments, which are very astute in terms of the height of the hurdle that people have to go through. Just looking at the number of, given that, you know, diabetic retinopathy has been a target of so many groups, you know, and so much resources and attention has been given to this problem for so long. The fact that there are currently only 2 FDA-approved devices tells you a lot about, the amount of scrutiny that the FDA is putting companies through, and rightly so, because it's a fully autonomous device with no doctor in the loop. So our company, Retina AI, has targeted this. We have a product, a flagship product, and we are currently in the right there inside of the FDA process, and doing testing and clinical trials, and having to go back and do some rework on aspects of our device. One thing that becomes clear is that this is it's a realm of the industry, and as Danelia mentioned, there's it's one thing to have nice graphs that one can discuss at meetings, proof of concept, those are sort of like really easy barriers to get through, but the standards that one has to go through from the standpoint of a quality management system and medical device software, and risk assessment, things like human factors validation studies. These are all even beyond the actual clinical efficacy of safety and efficacy of the device that a person has to show. All of the different subgroups on which the device has to work on and is expected to do well on, and down to the statistical significance of 95% confidence intervals and what the regulators agree on, with the company. It becomes a very expensive, a very intricate process. And as Daniela mentioned, just a simple, binary classifier, in effect, of disease or no disease, more than mild diabetic retinopathy or not, vision threatening or not, is I personally have, I've spent the last 5 years thereabouts, working on this problem, and IDX just recently raised $75 million, and we've raised, almost $10 million, and we have been, plowing forward on this one particular problem. So in terms of what I see that there's sort of going to be a little bit of a divergence, and I like the direction. I like the fact that, in the US, there is, the FDA has spent enormous amount of resources understanding this problem, and ensuring that, the gate is, well kept, and that quality cybersecurity, and that patients are going to be safe, right? If it works well on African-American, on Caucasian patients, but not on African-American patients, that's a problem. If it works well on people that are above the age of 40 because they don't have that sheen on their retina, but when you get to younger patients who are 22, 23, and they still have that retinal sheen, if you're getting different things, or for instance, if you've trained your algorithm on just fundus images, and you're able to get good results with CSME by fundus photography, but how well does it do on OCT? And so and then even the way that the algorithm interacts with the human at the front, and the algorithmic decisions that are made from not just the data science standpoint of getting the appropriate thresholds that are, for instance, camera specific, et cetera, but all the way through the entire stack. How does the back end work? How does the front end work? And then how do you secure the entire thing? It's quite an enormous effort. But what's going to happen, I think, is that as soon as that initial hurdle is really mastered, a lot of companies will then begin to be able to focus on innovation at the level of data science. And so, not to discount the meetings and the proof of concept and all those interesting things, as soon as we're really able to get our minds around how do you build good software, how do you build quality software, there's already a great pipeline, a great amount of information in that world, that community of medical device software. I chaired the Medical Device Software Summit this summer in Boston. A lot of the large companies like Medtronic, GE Healthcare, Siemens, et cetera, have been in this game for quite a while. They are often not the innovators in terms of being nimble and being able to get things to move forward. So I think as soon as the smaller companies are able to get their minds around, how do you build good software? How do you validate good software? How do you do clinical trials? How do you templatize this and make this a more automatic process? Then there can be a real connection between the academic institutions where people are thinking a lot about, how do we innovate? We've already showed this, we have this paper, that, and the other, and there are these things that we can use AI for, and then that feasibility of how do you then have a joint partnership where you can get things through and you can get good products to patients quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for highlighting the complexity and costs involved there, really to make sure that these algorithms are safe, because we do want them to be available, yet at the same time, there's a high bar there. I see Ming has his hand up, so I want to defer to him. Oh, you're still on mute.
So I just try to demonstrate how to raise hand and lower hand. No, I'm kidding. So, and I just want to remind our panelists, we just make our comments as concise as possible, and 1 or 2 minutes. And then I really appreciate Diana and Stephen what you mentioned about because medicine is highly regulated. When we launch our app, everybody asks for, do you have a regulatory approval? For example, that's why we are only managed to deploy our app in the Apple Store in Australia only. So only when we work with WHO, they have a special account that allow them to globally deploy. So that's only when we work with WHO, we are able to deploy this simple visual acuity app, simple VA testing app globally. So this is so hard. And then also one quick comment is that in FDA is getting life so difficult because when the two predicate already available, IR and IDS-DR. So suppose 510K clearance should be very easy, but then now they still require you to run a pivotal trial, prove your accuracy versus ground truth. So this is about, like you talk about $3 to $4 million trial. So that's why in the upcoming sections, I would invite Marina from the FDA specifically share her idea why you require such a robust or so conservative trial to prove a 510K product, when the predicate are available. Thank you.
I see Risha's hand is raised.
Yes, I just wanted to add a quick comment. Completely agree with all the discussion we're having so far. And I think one of the challenges that we face in bringing, AI technology and deployments is also in the APAC region, where it's one thing to create technology that can create better access for patients. But very often we're in settings where there's low resource constraints. We don't have the technology that really enables us to even layer on like a wedge of technology, like an AI solution. So I think the challenge is also, do we even have the right foundation to be able to bring in more sophisticated technological solutions? And I think that's going to be a challenge as well.
Yes, Judy?
Yes, besides all the things that have been mentioned, like a lot of things in life, biggest hurdle, I think, one of the biggest hurdles, the money, finances. I'm sure all the people in the business world, Stephen, raising money, researchers needing to get grants, pharmaceutical companies working on, we all need money, and it's been very difficult. Also, as a physician, tele-ophthalmology has been very difficult to adapt here in the United States because the reimbursement for performing tele-screening has been very little. One thing that did change during pandemic was that the reimbursement did get a little bit better, and also the awareness got bigger. So many people tried to do tele-ophthalmology, but then they found that it actually takes longer. So when the pandemic is dying down here, we're going back to what we were doing previously. So I think the reimbursement for these type of screening is one challenge. Second thing is that we have had AMD screening. 4C Home detects intermediate AMD conversion to a wet AMD, and with a tele center. However, again, there was no billing, no reimbursement part for the physicians. So I think that's also limited the use here in the United States. INUC and IDX, DR is great because there is actually a reimbursement code for that here in the United States. However, the upfront cost, who is going to get the camera set up and all that, again, that's been a point of contention, and the cost of setting it all up, and then who gets what part and who gets the referral and so forth. So those things have been a little bit of a hurdle here in the United States. And going forward, I think, as we learn to adapt more of tele-screening, telemedicine, tele-ophthalmology, we have to bring down the cost, upfront cost, as well as somehow improve the reimbursement for the physicians and the providers.
Judy, those comments are definitely spot on in terms of the reimbursement, and that's been a huge hurdle, not just a little hurdle, for how tele-ophthalmology's not really exploded in the US until COVID, which put it on par. And of course, you couldn't do in-person visits, so everyone was forced to switch. So now I'd actually like to ask Eric Rosenberg a question, because he's in the forward-thinking group about metaverse and digital society and what you can do online, including education, meetings, and other things besides clinical care. So do you believe that if COVID settled down, sorry, the long question, that people will want to go back to the way that things were before, or would they continue to move forward with this brave new world of online only?
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, definitely a great question, a challenging one. At the least, even now, let's talk a little bit about telemedicine and teletechnologies. It's been available. Ophthalmology has been a little bit slow to adopt, and I think in general, ophthalmology is slower to adopt most technologies. I would argue that that's existed throughout the history of ophthalmology. And telehealth and telemedicine's not very different. With COVID being gone, I don't know that that matters as much. Still, people have their strong feelings about going places, right? The majority of us, we obviously interact with each other on a more frequent basis, but there's still a large percentage of the population that is not excited to go out. And I think these technologies have a place. And then leading into the original question of this discussion is the hurdles that exist. And to avoid getting granular with my own particular subset of projects, taking a step back, I think that the two largest hurdles that we're going to face as a group is standardization. And there's a great lecture that was given by the NIH NEI with, I think actually Daniela was a part of that panel, where they started talking about ISO and standardization. And that's going to be instrumental with any future that we see. And we tend to get, pigeonholed into our own individual projects. And in doing so, it's going to cause a problem going forward if there's not some level of collaboration broadly and globally with the technologies. I think that there's going to be a role for educating physicians as to why that's important. Enter, the DOS. I think that you're going to meet barriers to entry even larger than that is just the regular comprehensive practitioner that's out seeing people. Why do I need to use this? What is this good for? And then if I'm adopting yours, how does that integrate with everything else? So starting these conversations early, I think, is instrumental, and having everybody play nice in the sandbox is even more important, right? I think that's going to be your largest barrier. And because we're all fighting to get that FDA approval, right? We're all fighting to get that regulatory hurdle overcome, and it's very challenging at the least, and that leaves competition levels high. It's important not to lose sight of the bigger picture, because otherwise you're going to exist in solidarity, and it's going to time itself out. It's not going to evolve with the technologies.
Wonderful. And now I'd like to turn to Xingru He to ask a little bit about, you're from a public health background and thinking about the public health problems in China and being at university and at the same time clinical care. What do you see that China is doing different that, for adopting these new technologies in tele-ophthalmology, digital ophthalmology, that maybe the rest of the world could pay attention to?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. I see this from the perspective of scale. I mean, any technology, if it doesn't scale or benefit the society, only stay in the paper or in the lab, it's not valuable. Well, I shouldn't say that it's valuable, but it didn't exploit its value. And I always see this as I learned a lot from the WHO Health System Management Framework, including governance, delivery, or the public health model. Finance, just like what Judy has just mentioned, human resources, tools such as AI and different softwares, IT systems, and ethics. And I think from these dimensions, what China or not only in China, but also globally, I think most of the breakthroughs and hurdles are still focused on how we are developing the technology and how we are going to, let the technology deploy by going through the registration or the administrative part, as well as the finance, as well as the human resources. I think these are most of where the breakthroughs and hurdles are coming from, but not much are seen in the delivery, as well as the ethical parts. I think what China has done well differently is the population. I think the number of data that we can gather in a short amount of time is the advantage. But also the ethical issues might rise because of such a big population. Using AI as an instance, even if we have very high sensitivity, specificity, great AUC curves, but we're covering so many people, just by missing a little bit, it might cause a lot of stress to not only the patients, but also to the hospital systems. So I think these are some of the comments I would like to add to Robert's question.
Yeah, that's very true. When you're only covering 100 or 300 million people versus a billion people, that 1% difference can make a big difference. I'd like to ask Martin a question about maybe sensors and technologies that are developing in that field, bioengineering. Do you think there's anything that not going to be too expensive, but really able to be deployed at scale, maybe built off of digital platforms that can help add additional insight into eye diseases, so that we're not just relying on the low-hanging fruit like checking vision or something, but other more higher level biomarkers that may become relevant in the next year or two?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, because this is one of the biggest challenges. I mean, in the lab, we can build stuff. We can put together a really nice sensor and we can test it on an animal model, but it doesn't really bring much translational value. It doesn't really get you from bench to bedside. Likewise, we work a lot on decentralization of digital health technologies, and there again, there are no-code or low-code solutions and even software as a service, but they don't really tick the boxes for the sort of applications that we're looking at. So to actually build something that's going to have some sort of clinical usefulness or even commercial potential, you're looking at, as Judy says, getting lots of money together, and then building together a team of interdisciplinary specialists. I guess the closest we have come to achieving that was with the blockchain project last year, where we worked together with industry collaborators. And when you bring industry on board, it's a totally different experience to when you're just spinning something up in the lab. I mean, these guys are professionals at bringing products to market, right? So it's huge amounts of money being pushed into it, and huge teams. And it was a huge learning experience for me to see, project managers, front-end, back-end developers, independent auditing, hardened testing, the security protocols that we have to go through, and then even having money set aside for, white hat hackers to have bounties on the smart contracts that we made. This is sort of the difference that, just doing some research and getting a quick paper on something versus getting product to market. And it's not a dissimilar experience when you're building sensors or electrodes, because there again, we've been working with some really big engineering companies who take a very different approach. We care about the innovation, they care about the marketing, they care about getting products quickly to market. So it's a different strategy, but it's fun to play both games.
Yeah, that's really important comments about these hurdles, not just the money that's involved to develop this, but also once you deploy it, you need additional industry and collaboration and lots of partners together just to get to that commercialization. Which leads me to ask Richa, who has experience with Google Health and Verily, all of these healthcare arms of Alphabet that's trying to develop new technologies to help many people and get them into the world, working together with academicians and others. Where do you see what's, I know you can't reveal any secrets, but what do you think is happening in the next year in terms of this like industry, partnerships, and what could be rolled out for actual patient care for digital health?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think I would kind of go back to what Xingru was saying about scaling. I think scalability is very important in being able to translate what has been developed and going from code to clinic. And so what we are very much interested in looking at is it's one thing to develop an AI solution or a diagnostic tool, but then how do we translate that into being able to use it at population scale and being able to create patient impact? And that's what drives us. And so a lot of the efforts that we're placing for the next year or two is there's one aspect of it, which is developing innovation and being able to bring something to benefit patient care, but it's also working with partners that can bring that to the forefront. And so whether it's working with government and national screening programs and being able to see how we can integrate AI solutions within existing screening programs, or working with large hospital networks that can integrate that within their workflows. Those are some of the areas that we are very focused on. And I think that's what enables us to say that that we were able to bring benefit to not just a handful of people, but at a large scale. So really looking at scalability besides just the aspect of developing solutions.
Yeah, thank you so much. I haven't seen any audience questions come up yet. I want to encourage you, don't be shy. Ask any question you like. This group is awesome. They're very laid back and happy to comment on, all these hurdles that relate to digital ophthalmology. Ming, do you want to ask some questions also?
Yes, I think what Xingru raised is a very important issues in terms of how to scale the adoptions of either the artificial intelligence or app. So in Australia, actually, our experience is very quite frustrating, because for example, when we developed this AI for DR, they allowed non-professional, like for example, the general practice GP and endocrinologist to use it and then screen for diabetic retinopathy. And Australia government so kind that they actually set up a new, they call it Medicare benefit scheme, MBS item number, that allow the GP and endocrinologists to charge DR screening on the top of what they bill the patient, $55 or $65. But then when we really try this in a real world clinic, the general practice say, the GP said, no, we are too busy. We're too busy for our routine work. We're not comfortable explaining the patient's report to DR scan report to the patient. We have a lot of food on our plate already. We're not comfortable. And then actually what we end up is a final solution is we set up a DR screening modality in eye disease screening modality in the GP clinic. Then after that, then the GP can charge for this new item, MBS item number. And then we connect if the patient got positive result, we connect them with make up another appointment through Oculo, the referral software we mentioned. And then the patient can set up an appointment with the virtual optometrist. Then the patient can talk to the virtual optometrist, because our GP doctors, they're not comfortable to explain the report to the patient. So this is really interesting. So in a way that in the real world, this adoption in either of a more doctor or patients or and the business model is all very challenging. So even with when you have an FDA approved product, it doesn't mean you will succeed.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Judy more about the 4C home. So it's like home device to monitor AMD, detect certain levels that need treatment potentially. And I know that the reimbursement was a big challenge, but if you remove that and just say, okay, now it's paid reasonably, but not like you're going to make a lot of money off it, do you think it would still get good uptake, or are people just, more of that age group wanting to come in, get their treatments? Is it a small group that would adopt it? Because they're used to digital technology, but not mainstream. How would you characterize what would happen in next year if suddenly it was paid for well?
Sure. So 4C Home is for dry AMD patients, and these patients, they do still need to come in. They're not only relying on this device, where the threshold, if one goes above the threshold, then the telecommunications center alerts the physician that your patient needs to come in. I think also the device costs money, and Medicare does reimburse. So the patient can, if they're wanting to use it, they can use it if they meet certain visual acuity criteria, 20/60 or better, and have drusen or pigmentary changes in one eye. So if they meet it, they can do it. But again, it does depend on the elderly population's willingness to use these type of devices. And also that one requires a good visual field as well. So in the clinical trial, about 29% of the subjects were excluded, ended up getting disqualified because they could not use the machine. So it is not for everybody. And people need to be willing to use it, but once they do use it, they're sort of addicted to it. They use it almost every other day or every day, and it's portable. So like in Wisconsin, I have many patients who go to south, Florida or Texas or Arizona for wintering, and they can take that with them if they desired. Another exciting field in the future, hopefully near future, is home OCT. OCT that can be done at the patient's home in between patient visits to the doctor's office. And with the incorporation of artificial intelligence, because there will be lots of E-scans generated with each imaging, it will tell us whether the fluid is starting to increase or not, whether it's intraretinal or subretinal fluid, and how much the volume of the fluid is. So we actually could connect the dots and get a trajectory curve of when the fluid is being increased. And that we actually get paid for if a physician were to review those data at least once a month. There is a reimbursement for that. Having said all of that, I think there is some concern about underserved population who may not be as willing to use it or even get exposed, depending on the physician and the type of practice they end up going to. So I think there may still be some issues with health disparity, even with these exciting technology. However, as we go longer and longer with our medication durability, I think these type of home monitoring, as well as other wearables and other apps, will become more and more important.
Home OCT sounds very expensive. So it's almost like everyone is trying to recreate the medical experience of the office outside of the office, using the tools and the gold standards because we know what to do with those results, and then try to replicate it. Just like in glaucoma, I mean, there's Eye Care Home, there's All Eyes virtual reality visual fields. We started doing some research where we send these devices home with the patient. Can they administer it to themselves to collect data in between office visits to know, instead of coming back at a routine interval, could they just come back for the in-office testing only and still be monitored in traditional way, but not so frequently? So I see this as an area in the coming future where we try to find the right price point and still kind of do the things that we're used to be doing. I see Daniela's hands up, so please go ahead.
Robert, I'll try to be brief, but if I had to, and we're all discussing here adoption of those technologies, if I had to boil down challenges and how can we overcome those, I think I would pick two main reasons. The first one is what you were discussing, Judy discussed, is about the use case. So how exactly the output is going to change physician decision or patient management. In the world, we are all now facing when it comes to imaging, the segmentation tools, when it comes to patients, with the status of the patient at that given point in time. And that brings efficiency, brings reliability, has a massive impact in health screening services. But honestly, I think the huge difference for patients will be, and that's very far still, but when we're going to be comfortable in acting in future prediction AI-based algorithms. So just so we don't forget the true potential, but we're still in the segmentation and in the very concrete use cases that can, with a human in the loop, we can immediately decide whether the output is reliable or not. And then the second point for massive challenges for adoption, Eric mentioned, Stephen mentioned, it goes down to very basic infrastructure in data science. Our systems, they don't talk to each other. Our OCTs don't talk to each other. Our EMRs don't talk to each other. That goes back to the experience Ming was mentioning. How can we help a physician asking them to do more? That's not going to work. And that's not going to alleviate the hurdles of the healthcare system. That's not going to translate into patient benefit. So we have to take that out of the physician without taking from the physician the treatment. The physician is to decide how to manage the patients, but the physician is not to read out outputs and have to upload stuff. So again, massive effort, and we have to do this together. Different sectors of the field will need to collaborate for very basic infrastructure on data management. Sorry, I think I went more than two minutes.
I like how Daniela highlighted the predictive analytics components of big data. You know, what can we add in value to what we already do? If we collected enough interesting longitudinal diverse data, now it can make like a curbside recommendation to physicians so that they can have better prognostication for various kind of patients, knowing the outcomes of all our data sets. And that's very powerful. Of course, getting everyone to contribute the data and share it so that it's, you know, democratized is a big challenge. I see Stephen's hand's up. I would like to hear your comments.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I would also like to be brief, rather. I like the way this has all been scoped, in the sense that we're not talking about robots taking over and futuristic things, but what can happen in the year 2022, 2023. And to Prof. Hayes' comment regarding your experience in Australia, here in the US, there's sort of a system approach to it that we're benefiting from that has sort of built up over the years with regards to incentivization structure in the reimbursement. There's a HEDIS for the health plans, and so they're incentivized. They have to do these diabetic retinopathy screenings. And there's also MIP scores. So we have metrics that incentivize that, and a primary care physician can't say, I don't care, I'm too busy, so I'm not going to do a diabetic retinopathy screen. That's poor care, because they're getting paid to take care of a diabetes patient. But also now looking at some of the longer term things, as Judy mentioned, Homo CT, that's an exciting area. It's not an area that is going to come about next year or the year after, or even the year after, quite honestly. But it's an area that's already feasible, and there's already technologies like Lumedica has a product out, for instance, that they're trying to get for as low as $10,000. And so it starts to become feasible. And Robert, excellent point regarding cost. Cost becomes such a critical thing as to whether a technology is viable or not. But once you can get that Homo CT into the patient's house, then it becomes truly a paradigm shift in terms of when they get fluid. AI can read it, and the patient can come in or self-report, or you have notification systems. And this is all technology that's already there. But again, implementation science is sort of the crux of what's going to move things forward, as Daniela mentioned. And that's really where the rubber hits the road.
I'd like to throw out another question there for anyone to answer. We've seen that Australia and China have gone along with these kiosk models, and so also in New York, just placing something in the public area so that if they happen to be nearby or had free time, they can just go get an automated screening without other, people helping them. What do you think of that? And would that be viable in the US, getting to scale, that is? Is Stephen's hand still up to answer, or?
Oh yeah. I mean, I could answer, but I forgot to put my hand down. So what happened?
Anyone could answer.
If no one else has some comment on it, I'll comment. Yeah.
Okay.
So, sorry, Danielle, please go ahead.
That's going to be interesting because you really have to trust the output, right? So it all goes back to patient safety and how we can be sure that there are humans in the loop or the system is tight enough so we don't under-diagnose conditions, because it's a fine balance. So on the one hand, this technology can really alleviate the burden of the healthcare system and decentralize screening and decentralize diagnosis or management. But on the other hand, we can't let people less assisted, which could happen if the output is imprecise. So it's going to be, I have mixed feelings, I have to say, about this release, but I think it's going in the right direction, but we need more breaks in the system or more checks and balances, make sure patient safety is taken care of.
Oh, and let me just also make one small adjustment. I don't mean the kiosk to diagnose autonomously without the doctor in the loop. What I mean is, like, you know, there's some AI algorithms that are screening, let's say, for vascular disease. So you get your photo and you're told, oh, you know, you're going to be at high risk for hypertension and diabetes. You need to see your primary care to get it checked out. And maybe insurance covers this because they're interested in identifying disease early. In that kind of scenario, doing that screening, just like there's blood pressure, you know, monitors in the pharmacy stores to drive in traffic and they can check themselves. What do you think about health that way? Maybe we'll start with Eric or Richa or something.
You know, I kind of think that we're not going to have an option, honestly speaking, in the near future. So I think we're going to have to start getting used to that model. There's one of two options, right? We either create more physicians and decrease maybe the quality associated with that, or we find novel solutions to our population-based problems in order to solve the larger problem at hand. But, you know, going on top of Daniela, Judy, and Stephen, you know, I think that as these technologies develop, the biggest, you know, elephant in the room is the necessity to have high fidelity data systems that are decoupled from the health disparities that exist. That's going to be huge. It's really unfortunate, right, that some of the populations that need it the most are the ones that are going to be the least apt to use these technologies. And then the algorithms that are written on it are going to be very jaded, right? You know, we're going to have a lot of error built into the system. I mean, you can use volatility as its own metric, right, in order to kind of use it as a prediction tool. But, you know, ideally, you would have large data sets that would give you, you know, high fidelity data is what you're looking for. But interestingly, too, I think the advent of the blockchain technologies offer a modality in which for patient data to follow them going throughout the system. So what's unique now is that I see a patient over the last, you know, 10 years, I know everything about them. And then as soon as they move to Florida, or let's say they go somewhere else, that new physician knows nothing about them. There's nothing that's following them. I mean, regardless of home OCTs or visual field tests, they can ask me for the data, but whether or not that's going to go through with, going to go get faxed over, and whether or not the physician goes through it is highly dependent on the clinician. But with the development of maybe more agnostic systems that just look at pure data, I think maybe that's the next step, that'll be able to process those data points independent of some of those other metrics, and then start bringing in demographic data and other things like that for predictive modeling. So I think some of these kiosk systems are going to provide just that, right? It'll add a data point entry, whether or not they go see the clinician or not see the clinician, and then being able to process that information over an extended period of time using the algorithms, that might be valuable. Sorry, that might have been more than a minute.
Ming, do you want to comment also?
Yes, because we tried this in Australia. So in Australia, big shopping mall, they have other product, they call it 3D body scan. Just 3D body scan. What's your lipid loss? What's your lipid adipose composition of the body? But then they manage it very poorly. So there's no entry system, and then people actually eat inside a lot of rubbish, garbage in the kiosk, and it didn't work. So, but then what I want to raise is that this is the early phase of the product. But later on, people will run it like an Amazon self-service store. Amazon self-service store, nobody can complain. I mean, in New York, I saw so many. So then it's just that there's an iteration process. So when we see the initial version, it wasn't good, but later on will become better. So, and then also I would like to raise our panelist attention. It's that so in the fight, we have more like 50 minutes to go. I would suggest to have a scene rule because actually now we have more than 1,000 stream viewer outside of this. We're not seeing this in the Zoom. Actually, a lot of stream viewer in China, more than 1,000. So they do raise questions. So I suggest pass to Xingru. Xingru can see the questions, and then Xingru, can you, because we also need a little bit interaction with the people as well. So can you just try to ask those questions on behalf of them?
Yes, but I do see there's one question already coming from one of the audiences, from Li Xingwen. This audience is asking, what's your ideas about digital eye health's future application in China? And I mean, we don't have to limit it to China, but if so, that would be great because that'll answer the audience's question. I see Martin is raising his hand. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, only because it fits really nicely with one of the projects that we've just launched. So I thought I would just briefly tell you about that. So we, it's an old medical school friend of mine actually who set up a company that uses natural language processing and AI to do automated phone calls to patients who are post-operative after cataract surgery or even after an intravitreal injection. And it's based on the fairly sound scientific evidence that you can screen patients just with a very basic questionnaire as to whether or not they actually need to have a regimented follow-up after their procedure, or whether you can delay the follow-up and reduce some of the burden to the doctors. So we're really interested to try this in Hong Kong. The system's just been translated both into Cantonese and Mandarin. So once we've done a little pilot here in Hong Kong, we're looking at rolling that out into mainland China to see whether the huge volume of cases that are done in the hospitals in China could have some relief for the doctors for the post-operative visits by just creating automated phone calls to the patients. So that's a really exciting new
Well, that'll make it very efficient in communicating with the population. And thanks for your comment. How about Judy?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that is already starting to be very robust is using retinal imaging, such as fundus photographs or OCT, to prognosticate the severity of the disease, how many injections a patient may need in the future as a biomarker, and systemic disease predictions, such as potentially Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, etc. So I think, eyes window to our souls, and we may be able to use retinal imaging besides ocular disease, but rest of the body as well.
Great, thank you, Judy. Thank you. Oh, I see Stephen has his hands raised. Stephen?
Very quickly. I just want to say that the regulatory role is a critical role, in all of this. As we anticipate potential technologies, that's where really what it comes down to. And our company, for instance, has benefited enormously from our in-depth interactions with the FDA. So we don't see that as a burden at all. We give them kudos. They're doing a great job, and I think the U.S. is really blessed to have that gate, because as companies start to think, as innovators start to think, it comes down to, how do you validate that, right? So for instance, natural language processing, great comment there, Eric, for things like prognosticating day one follow-up, post-up day one. It's going to work, but how well and exactly how do you quantify where there might be limitations and who might you miss that might get endophthalmitis and go blind? And being able to really, really hone that down is going to be critical.
I see. Thank you. No, that's very important. And Professor Mingguang?
Yes, actually, I kind of partially disagree with Stephen, because actually regulatory approval is a great burden, significant burden for any company. It's a huge challenge, and then if you talk about to spend another $24 million to prove the performance against ground truth, most of the time at the ground truth you have to it requires 7-field ETDRS or All you have to do this wide field or pulse OCT to prove DR or DME, very expensive. And then running a trial like this, because the argument is that when the predicate is available, you're supposed to just compare with the predicate instead of the ground truth. But then now, I mean, FDA set a very high bar, and then everybody have to spend $4 million for a 510K similar product. So that's why I encourage our participants and the panelists to also join the next sections where we have Frank Chan from IR. They will share their experience in terms of how to put IR into market. And then we have Marina. Marina, unfortunately, she's not able to attend live, but then real time. But then she just sent us the pre-recording, and she understands all these issues. But then she would direct us to what is the protocol, why they require all this very robust process.
I see. Stephen, what's your response to that?
Yeah, thank you. Very quickly. So we're on the receiving end of this, right? We're suffering through this, so to speak. And so that's my position from where I'm saying that it's actually really good. You know, when you look at the points that the FDA raises, in this particular case, the stakes are so high because there's no doctor in the loop. It's fully autonomous AI, major level of concern, class 2 device. And so when they approved this initially in 2018, there was law that was passed, the 21 CFR product code for that particular device that required that there would be clinical validation for every time that this is approved. And I agree with that, you know, that because there's on the one hand, a lot of, there's probably thousands of groups out there that believe that they have some kind of diabetic retinopathy solution. But when you look at the level of quality that is truly required to truly get a safe and effective product out onto the market, you start to see that even just minor deviations like a different camera, a different workflow could change, you know, everything. And it could change it by orders of magnitude in terms of threshold, or by, you know, set by probably sometimes up to 30 percentage points from a sensitiveness to a specific perspective. So it's really, really, really needs to be closely scrutinized before it's out on the market.
Okay, let's take one last comment from Professor Minguo, and then we'll switch, because I see hundreds of great questions, so I can't wait to ask those questions.
So I just another quick comment or a little bit advertisement for our next section. So on your next section, we also invite the CTO, Chief Technology Officer from AirDoc, AIRDOC. So AirDoc is a listed AI company in China. So they claim they have achieved, I think, 500 million US income annually. So this is a huge amount of income from mainly DR screening project. So we would like to have them to share with us how they, not just how to earn this money, but how to deploy this into the market. I mean, or scale it up. Thank you.
Great. I see. Sorry, I need to rest my eyes. I saw so many great questions, but I picked two of them very great ones. One of the audiences is asking, how do you resolve the issue of data silos in regarding of training the models, not only in terms of exchanging or merging the data between organizations, but also different devices or device compatibility? And does any of the panelists and the chairs have the experience, or would you like to answer that question? Yeah, Stephen, please.
Good answer. So yeah, we have a lot of experience. You know, we probably have the most experience in terms of multi-device clinical trials and research and tuning for diabetic retinopathy and for diabetic eye disease. And what we're learning is that you really have to look at the device, and that devices are indeed different. There are similarities within certain margins, but depending on the barrier that one is looking to scale from a standpoint of predictability and precision, devices do vary. And so ultimately, it comes down to the resource issue. Like, you have to really know what your intended uses of that device are, clearly specified, and then clearly validated clinically with a large enough sample size.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other comments on this question?
Just doubling down, it's a massive problem and it's a massive challenge. And
it's a massive challenge.
AI research so expensive. We have to do better. There are unnecessary problems.
Yes, thanks for the comment. And I think this question is quite strongly related to the next question one of the audience is asking. The companies or the research institute needs to survive organically. And just like what Professor Minguo has mentioned, it's very expensive to go through the regulatory, approval process as well. But the question comes from, where do you think AI, or what's the relationship between AI and mixed reality in eye care, as well as digital therapeutics? Is AI the key role, or is AI just a tool among those? Any comments on that question? Yes, Professor Mingguang.
I think mixed reality or augmented reality is just it still require a lot of like higher speed of internet connection, and then also because if you really use it, because I tried it.
Oh, you tried it.
Terrible. It's terrible because
it's terrible.
Yeah, it's terrible because it's just not good enough. It's so dazzling when you do surgery. It's impossible. So, but then again, in my understanding, everything early version is not perfect, but later on it'll be better. So if we stop things because it's not perfect, then we're in trouble.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yes. I see, Rika, did you raise your hand just now?
I just wanted to say that in general, I do believe that AI is part of the larger picture. It's just one piece of the puzzle. It really is the nexus of people, processes, and technology that has to come together and work together. And if either one of them do not work perfectly in sync, then there's always going to be a challenge. So it's finding out just how can we make all of these, how do we train or how do we provide better available awareness about how to use technology for the healthcare staff or the end user? How do we set up processes in place to enable adoption of AI workflows seamlessly? And then how do we build the right AI tools that is actually addressing a clinical unmet need and have them come together? And if you have that equation right, then it's, then that's perfect. That's what we want to aim for.
Thank you for your insight. How about Robert?
I think all these new technologies are tools, and it's up to us to find the right use case for them. Because in a different environment and a different unmet needs, one tool may be better than another. And a lot of it does come down to the usability with the patients and the doctors and the cost. Because we can do things our traditional ways, or we can apply the tools. We're a pretty conservative field in medicine because we need to be safe, but apply the new tools to get some scalability. And data and algorithms happen to have that real advantage of scalability, but also the flaw of generalizability. Because when we talk about AI, people are saying, well, we want one algorithm that knows the right answer, and therefore, regulation is going to decide that. And yet at the same time, I believe that no human is the one right answer, right? I mean, you can ask one glaucoma doc one answer and another one give you a different answer for the same patient. So why are we trying to make an AI that can answer everything correctly when medicine's not black and white, like it is, in computers where something can be A/B tested? But medicine is much more difficult than that. So my thoughts are mostly that around AI is very specific for the tasks that you will create. You can make a Chang AI, you can make a Professor He AI, that'll behave like the data that you collect from that person. And that may be right or not. You need consensus. You need like people to get together to decide what we'd want to apply in a large environment. And as you get bigger, the problems get bigger. So you can make a very nice use case in small scenarios, and then you hope for the big use case eventually, but you have to kind of master the smaller ones first, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Essentially, it drives down to what value and what solution do you provide to the patients or the customers or the people who are using these tools, right? Thank you for your comment. Judy, what would you like to say?
Yeah, to piggyback on what Robert has said, AI may be specific for the task, and AI may may depend on the input, what data set you used, and that may determine your output, which may not be applicable, generalizable. Nevertheless, I'm always an optimist. I hope that in the future, it could elevate all the physicians on certain tasks to a certain degree, such as OCT has done. for retina specialists. I was a resident at Bascom Palmer, and we were always flabbergasted how good Dr. Don Gass could see retina where we couldn't see anything. But now with OCT, we're all almost like Dr. Don Gass. So I'm hoping that on certain tasks, all of us will end up becoming better, more accurate, consistently. Although there are many things that we human as physicians will have to intervene.
Thank you, Judy. And Eric, well, we'll take your comment as the final comment from this roundtable.
No, I think you should probably find somebody else to do the final comment, but you know, to that point, you know, I think it's important that we don't carbon copy, right? When you create novel solutions, we have a tendency to want to copy what it is that we're doing with the new substrate. And I think it's a fallacy to believe that, because EMR is a perfect example. It's something that we do need, and well, we need it to be a little bit better, but we do need, and it should be more for posterity on a back end kind of you know, application. But you know, it's important not to do that one-to-one. What we are writing needs to necessarily be in the chart. We need to find new ways to implement the technology, which may actually yield different outcomes, and that's good. That's important, right? That's how things evolve with time. And you know, just like we're not all Dr. Gass, and God knows I wish I could see a retina better than I can. You know, I think that these technologies, you know, that's a little bit more of a one-to-one case where it's applying its technology to be able to substitute a clinician's input. I think a lot of this data and what we perceive to be glaucoma and what we perceive to be some of these other pathologies may not be fully understood. And by applying some of these diagnostics and some of these new technologies, we may be redefining the whole field in general as it relates to those particular pathologies. So I think it's important to keep an open mind as these technologies evolve. And just because it may not be the result we're expecting, it may be a better one, if you will. And, you know, I think that through collaborative efforts, and that's why I like the Digital Ophthalmic Society, it's why I love the APTOS, and we've worked together a lot on these other things. We need to work together to get through some of these hurdles, right? Because we all face the same ones, and it's not always a competition, if you will. And believe it or not, by working together, you're going to create a platform that's going to be successful going into the future, and one's going to be dependent on the other, and that may be more valuable than anything itself. So thank you for this opportunity and letting me be here with everybody on stage.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you for all the panelists and chairs for providing your valuable wisdom and insight, as well as the experience.